You hear a dog barking in the background. That's the result of my idiot neighbor. Mental midget, if ever there was one. Greetings. How you doing? I'm always have been my entire life fascinated about the subject of light, and I've always known, even at an early age, that everything that I was told to believe in about it, and it was a belief system, and we're talking about a religion, not actual something that's logical, intelligent, and that follows, because genuine science actually has to be rational and realistic, and it has to fall within the paradigm of Occam's razor. And everything that they said about light, of course, is complete and utter nonsense. I'd actually like to go over some quotes, the only thing that we actually have that exists from Nikola Tesla about light. And I find it fascinating that people who think they're Tesla fans never quote this about him. Most of them are in pursuit of free energy, and that's a noble pursuit, and I'm certainly not against that at all, but understanding the nature of reality vis-a-vis the quotes from Tesla is quite important. Nikola Tesla uses words, and I'm about to quote Tesla here at length about light, elasticity and density. Yes, elasticity and density. And everything we observe about light, because light doesn't actually have a constant speed, light doesn't actually have a speed at all, I'll talk about that in a second, changes its rate of induction or its hysteresis of propagation, which is more accurate, depending on the medium that it's actually passing through. But it's not passing through like someone passes through a door. The actual disturbance is occurring in a different medium, and that's why, of course, the rate of induction changes. And, of course, you can't explain light speeding back up after it leaves glass, for example, without breaking the law of conservation of energy. So all these things that these people believe in, meaning modern-day quantum folks, is completely illogical and ridiculous. It can't... It's senseless. It's completely senseless in the extreme. So when Nikola Tesla refers to elasticity and density, he's talking about the rate of induction or the hysteresis of the ether as against itself in the nature of light. So here's Nikola Tesla. The velocity of any sound wave depends upon a certain ratio between the elasticity and density, and for this ether or universal gas, the ratio is 800 million times greater than that of air. That's not really important to this, but yada yada. Consequently, the speed of the ether is 900,000 times 1,085 feet, or 186,000 miles per second, and this is what Tesla is calling the speed of light, as in parlance that we've had now for a long, long time. I consider this extremely important, said Mr. Tesla. Light can be nothing else other than a longitudinal disturbance in the ether involving alternating rarefactions and compressions. In other words, light can be nothing other than a sound wave in ether, and that, of course, is incredibly important. I've pointed this out many times before. And we all have the idea of a speed of sound. Well, sound is a certain speed. Well, actually, the quote-unquote speed of sound changes depending on elevation and density of the air, whether it's cold or hot. The actual speed of sound changes from temperature, because obviously hot air is more rarefied, thinner. The difference there is minimal, but the difference is different at altitude. And there's a reason for that, because we all grew up with this notion that anything that has a speed has a velocity, and it's obviously moving from point A to point B. And this is ridiculous, both regarding sound and also to light, because sound's not an emission. Sound is a disturbance of the medium, that specifically being oxygen and nitrogen, i.e. the air. Nothing emits sound. What happens is that we're setting up a perturbation in the medium, just like a person in the middle of a pond is flapping. Did you love how much that dog can bark? That dog can seemingly bark nonstop for about 1 billion hours. I find that fascinating. This is what happens when you have horrific neighbors. I'm sure someone's going, did I hear a dog barking in the background? Why, yes, you do. It's definitely not my dog. On back to Nikola Tesla. This appears clearly, Mr. Tesla explains, if it is first realized that there is no Maxwellian ether. Maxwell had his own idea of the ether. I don't need to mention that. It becomes entirely impossible in the sense of current ideation that about the nature of light. The small candle can project particles, which of course he's making fun of the photon idea of light. A small candle can project particles with the same speed as the blazing sun, which has an immensely higher temperature and obviously greater power. We have made sure by experiments, said Mr. Tesla, that light propagates with the same velocity, irrespective of the character of the source. Such constancy of velocity can only be explained by assuming that it is dependent solely on the physical properties of the medium, especially density and elasticity force. And here, of course, he's referring to the hysteresis and the rate of induction of the medium as against itself. So, there exists, however, an element of incertitude which in itself is sufficient to invalidate completely the results. So we don't need to mention this person's name. Light is a wave motion of definite velocity determined by the elastic force and density of the medium. Now, light is not an emission. Cosmic rays are propagation, the speed of which depends on the propelling force and mass and may be much smaller or greater than that of light. So let's get on to discussing light specifically. Those are the quotes of Nikola Tesla about light. And Nikola Tesla is right. None of us, including me, ever heard this stuff in high school or college. That light's not an emission. Let's go over the things. And then a quote from Einstein about light. The notion, we were all taught this, including you and me, and everybody on this earth believes this nonsense. There's a list of them about light. And by the way, by quantum's own admission, all of quantum, by their own admission, is based upon their understanding of what light is and what it does, which is all completely ridiculous. Light is moving, light has a speed, light is not moving, and light doesn't have a speed. The speed is the hysteresis, or the rate of induction of the disturbance itself as against itself. It's the maximum rate of propagation, which changes, because the speed of light, if you will, or the hysteresis, or the rate of induction of light changes through glass and water and various other things. Light is not moving. It's not moving from point A to point B, but we all have in our heads the idea that something's moving, has a speed, and that's just fundamental to all human understanding, that something's moving, it has a speed. The light is a wave or a particle. Well, as I've said countless thousands of times, there's no such thing as a wave, because a wave is not what something does. A wave is not what something is, rather what something does. And certainly light is not a particle. A photon is an arbitrary conceptual abstraction invented by atomists in the cult of quantum, and it is a belief system. It's a religion. That light is a wave-particle duality, or das Lichtwand. Well, there are no dualities in nature implying an inherent contradiction. Light's an emission. Well, light is not an emission, yet we all suffer this idea that when we flick on the light switch that, a light bulb emits light. And it doesn't. It's actually setting up a disturbance of the coaxial circuit that us conventional human beings call light. Was not an emission at all. No different than a person. That's like saying that there was a little person in the light bulb, and the sea was everywhere, the pond was everywhere, including inside and outside the light bulb, and you're telling the person you're creating energy dissipation to flap his arms inside the light bulb, and of course a field disturbance is generated. Of course, that's an extremely crude analogy, but we all suffer that idea that light is an emission, but it's not an emission at all. As already said, nature must be rational and logical, and it definitely has to fall within the groove, the record groove of Occam's razor, and nothing of quantum regarding light does fall within that paradigm. It absolutely does not. Constructive and destructive interference is no different than mutual dielectric charge between masses, and that charge is a move to discharge. And the discharge is always, of course, in counter space. This is not really constructive and destructive interference, which I've said 1,000 times, and is fundamentally accurate, but specifically the devil being in the details is kind of wrong. It's right, but the more accurate thing would be to state that this interference pattern, the constructive and destructive interference, is either mutual annihilation in counter space, i.e. the dissipation of force and motion, i.e. subcentrifugal divergence, whether that be the coaxial circuit, circular linear polarization of light, i.e. the transverse electromagnetic component that makes up the coaxial circuit of light, or the multiplicative magnetic force manifestation, in which we would relate that to be relational to constructive interference. And of course the destructive interference is the mutual annihilation, or the dissipation of that energy in counter space. And then of course Once again, the coaxial circuit is no different than the conjugate geometry of the universe, of the magnetic and the dielectric. So this das Lichtquant, or light quantum, and Einstein said, "We are faced with a new kind of difficulty. We have two contradictory pictures of reality." They're only contradictory to insufficiently wise people like him and countless others of relativity and of quantum, this atomistic belief system, which of course is no different than a hammer thinking everything's a nail. To them, since as they are atomists and mathematicians' fundamental cornerstone religion is, if I can't count it, it doesn't exist and it doesn't serve any purpose to me. So Einstein says, we have two contradictory pictures of reality. Separately, the particle and wave theory, neither one of them fully explains the phenomena of light, but together they do. So you have these things that are seemingly diametrically opposed, which they're not. It's like talking about diametrically opposed principles of ice and water. Well, they're not opposed to one another. They're just different states, temperature and pressure states, of one and the same principle. So I've never used this in a video before. I like to use a simple analogy, like skipping a stone across the water. I've actually got a perfect stone here for skipping across. So I don't know if you ever skip stones across the water. The more energy you actually throw into the fling, and of course it depends on the angle of interception at the beginning skip, how steep it is relative to the angle of attack, so don't take the analogy too far. Skipping a stone across the water, in the case of the ether, both the water and the stone are one and the same thing in the case of light. Like a ripple in flipping a piece of fabric. I don't know if you've ever taken out a long string of fabric off of a roll, a long stretch of fabric, and you induced a little bit of jerk into the fabric, and you actually see this perturbation of the fabric. The fabric, of course, being the medium. So when the stone hits the water, we actually have a radial wave pattern. When you're skipping it and it actually hits the water at intermittent intervals, well, every time it hits the water, it creates this radial pattern that propagates from the contact. And of course, in the case of light, the stone and the water are one and the same thing. The release of energy necessitates this coaxial circuit, and that, of course, is how we have the idea of the propagation of light. And of course, light is propagating, but it's the propagation of the disturbance of the medium itself. The rate of the hysteresis of the ether, i.e. what Tesla calls the native elasticity of the ether. And when he says elasticity, he's just talking about the hysteresis of the ether. So when the stone hits the water, a radial wave pattern is created and the stone rebounds from the surface. The greater the power, of course, the higher the frequency. And the same is true of the skipping stone. If you actually really throw a lot of energy into it, you'll see, I've done it before, I don't know if you've ever done it, you put a lot of energy, you flick it just right, and you have the perfect stone. You'll see like extremely high frequency, the skipping stone, and the frequency is greater because the more power is released. The same is true of EMF, electromagnetic frequency, or EMR, electromagnetic radiation, where the higher the frequency, the greater the potential, and also too, the higher the frequency, the smaller the space. And the smaller the space, the higher the capacitance. The actual volume of gamma radiation, which is incredibly deadly, is insanely small relative to infrared radiation, which is incredibly voluminous. So, nature's box, if you will, contrary to human box, a larger box holds more stuff. And Mother Nature's, I don't want to say, it doesn't sound right, Mother Nature's receptacle here, the smaller the space, the higher the capacitance. So this wave-particle duality that they have the idea of is completely impossible, since it assumes both the duality and that the medium disturbance is somehow different than the medium condensation itself, which no one will fool, as I said before, would assume ice and water are two different things. And, of course, they're not two different things. And people will point to, since they think light is an emission and is traveling and it has a speed and all this stuff, they're talking about a single slit. And people love to talk about the dual slit experiment. They say, well, in a single slit, you just have this propagating wave front. It says the opening becomes the source, you have a single wave propagation in the case of, say, we have a wall and a single slit, and we actually initiate the release of light. Then you actually have a non-interfering emission from that. And quantum will speculate endlessly about something so divinely simple. The simple truth of it is, and Mother Nature is so very simple, she's a muddy feet and dreadlocked wearing hippie chick with a hemp skirt is that the opening itself becomes the source of light, because light is not traveling nor is it propagating. It's actually a disturbance in the medium. The actual single slit in the dual slit experiment, where they actually block out one of the slits and they have one slit, the single slit becomes the source of light, because that is the point of emission, because light is not traveling or propagating from point A to point B. So it was traveling through the slit. It's like, no, when the disturbance hits the slit, you know, the medium then has the slit to deal with as the point of propagation. So anytime a coaxial circuit of light encounters either a barrier or a limit, the light disturbance has then a new origin. Isn't that simple? That's as simple as it gets. That's Mother Nature simple. That's how these people, I mean, they overcomplicate everything. But from their idea, since light is an emission and it's traveling and all this other stuff, it's wave and a particle and a wave, they're completely confused. Mother Nature doesn't deal in that type of complexity. Well, they'll point to the photoelectric effect, where the frequency of the light greatly increases, then so does what they call the release of electrons. Well, J.J. Thomson called the principle of the electron not a particle, but 1 unit of dielectric induction. J.J. Thomson was correct. So they'll point to the photoelectric effect, where the principle of the electron, the greater the frequency, the higher the emission off a little, higher the frequency actually point at like a copper or a aluminum plate, then they'll actually have a greater increase of electrostatic emission, or what they actually call electrons. You know, the higher the frequency of light upon the metal plate, which is the dielectric reflector, the higher the electrostatic emissions are. These are what Eric Dollard referred to as broken loose holdfasts. What Eric Dollard means by a holdfast is what we call tie-down straps. Like in your truck, you have these ratcheting tie-down straps. And that's actually a kind of a brilliant analogy taken from Eric Dollard about what the principle of an electron is. It's like you ratchet down a tie-down strap too much, and it reaches the breaking point, and then it lashes out with the release of energy. That's what actually the principle of an electron is. It's not a particle at all. Because the smaller the space, the higher the capacitance. The higher the energy of the light, the smaller the frequency, the smaller spatial component, and therefore the release of, well, the principle of, I'm not going to say electrons, what we call the electron. And that's just an electrostatic emission, or as J.J. Thomson accurately, the genius that he was, called 1 unit of dielectric induction. So, explaining light becomes abundantly easy and divinely simplex if one flushes out of their brain this crazy, radical, insane notion that light is moving, it has a speed, it has a wave or a particle, wave-particle duality, it's an emission. Once that is flushed, and everybody suffers with that filth in their brain, because that's what we were all taught. Light is an emission, the speed of light, it's a wave and a particle and a wave-particle duality. That's a belief system. That's not science, it's not logical, it's not rational, it's not reasonable. Mother Nature doesn't work like that. And when I say Mother Nature, I'm not really talking about like a hippie chick living up in the clouds or something. People actually sometimes think that I'm actually referring to some spiritual or metaphysical entity we call Mother Nature, i.e. Natura naturans. I'm not. I'm just using it as a type of parlance and referring to Mother Nature, because I don't care what people believe in. None of that is any importance to me. But this doesn't jive with nature. It can't. What these people have all brainwashed us with is nonsense. Now, it's okay, like, well, they didn't know any better. You know, science makes improvements. Yeah, but this stuff has been continuing on now for well past 100 years. It's time for a reimagining of what is actually going on. And light is, as Nikola Tesla says, light is nothing other than a sound wave in the ether. Because sound is not an emission either. It's a disturbance in the medium, i.e. of the air. Nobody emits sound. Conventionally, when it says someone or something is making a sound, it's emitting sound. Well, conventionally, we all know what that means. But nothing is actually emitting sound. What they're setting up is a disturbance in the medium. That sounds like a distinction without a difference. Well, there is a difference there, but it's not much of one. And for the sake of human communication, it doesn't really matter. If I say something is setting up a disturbance in the air versus emitting sound, it's not necessary for sake of communication and understanding. This is true, but when it comes to understanding the principles of cosmic mechanics, it's vitally important we make that distinction, because nothing emits sound and nothing emits light. That's not my feeling or my opinion or my belief. It's an undeniable fact. It's the same thing Nikola Tesla said. So why are we still believing in this relativity nonsense and this atomistic view that light is a wave-particle duality and it's emission and it has a speed? And that's completely ludicrous. It doesn't follow common sense, logic, or wisdom. It's not even rational. It's not fundamentally rational to someone that has a rational mind. You know? Well, you should believe it because that's the way it is, and I have a PhD hanging on the wall. That's why you should believe me. And, you know, this is the stuff all of us grew up with, me included, but I mean, I knew they were wrong to begin with at a very young age. And figuring it out took time, but we were not taught to listen to the masters of field theory like Tesla, Steinmetz, Faraday, Heaviside, James Clerk Maxwell, and some of these other guys. We were taught to believe in relativity. Warping of space-time and a wave-particle duality. Well, that's a belief system. That's not science. It's not even rational or logical. I hope I kind of kept this short and simple, despite the fact there's a barking dog in the background. Woof! Ask me again why I don't have a dog. Not that I don't like dogs. Yeah, I'm always kind to dogs. Like to pet them. Hey, little doggy. Yeah, just not barking 24/7. I think that dog has a demonic voice box. It just barks all the time. Anyway, I hope you like this video. If you do, any donation is always warmly welcome. Have a great weekend. Goodbye. Bark! Woof! Oh, man. Ugh.